Welcome back to Bad Attitude C10. We're going to wrap up our cam upgrade today by installing our new SFI balancer we picked up from Jegs, and I put the specs here on the page so you can see them. Now this thing that we're going to do today is a little different. I do not have a tool to hold a flywheel, so we're going to go ahead and fabricate one using a piece of old angle iron. And I'd also like to touch base and say thank you to Bubba. He's a friend of the family that actually made this cam possible. He ended up getting the cam that was in the truck that we had spec'd out for a turbo application, because he's putting a turbo LS together at the moment, and he didn't ask for it in return for getting me the cam. He just wanted to be helpful in the build, but I went on ahead and gave it to him because he's helping me and I wanted to be able to say thanks. So without Bubba allowing this to happen, I'd be hadn't been to settle for the cam that I originally put in the truck. As y'all can see here, we're getting everything chucked up, and I do not recommend using a C-clamp like this. I was just in a pinch and it was cold as hell outside, and I was trying to go through this as fast as I could. And since the hose did not have to be perfect, they're just going to have some bolts go through it to lock up our crankshaft so we can torque the crank bolt once we get the balancer installed. I just was trying to do it as quickly as possible. So I started by drilling a pallet hole with a smaller bit, and even my oil to lube my bit was cold and thick. With my pallet hole now drilled, I went on ahead and put a unibit or a step drill bit, whichever you prefer, in. And again guys, the C-clamp is not keeping this as stable as it should. I made sure my bolt would fit through the hole from the bottom side, and it did, so I moved on to the next hole. So as you saw at that time, I just kind of held the vise with my vice grip hands, and it still moved around. So I had some new lube before I did this and put the bolts in like I should, and went on ahead and secured my vise to my drill press plate, I guess you'd say, and then I moved on to drill the next hole with the step bit. Have y'all noticed every time I oil my damn bits, they continue to smoke? That's weird. Now, when it came to installing my new masterpiece of a cam, or not a cam, but a crankshaft lock on my LS motor, dude, this engine stand played havoc. I mean, there was nowhere to get in there right. And every time I moved the camera around to try to get a good view of it, it was such a tight thing I'd had to reposition, and the camera was just in the damn way. So after fighting with the camera a few times and repositioning it here and repositioning it there, I finally just kind of gave up and tried to get a bird's eye view, but then I had to move and it was in the damn way again. So I just kind of moved it and gave up and moved forward, and I'll show you all the finished product. So guys, it probably looked sketchy as hell, but it worked. It served the purpose. It was a pain in the ass to install. Could only turn the bolts about a quarter of a turn using the boxed in or open end wrench. Couldn't get a socket on it. Next time I'll just save up and hope we can get a flywheel on this thing and use a flywheel lock. They're like 16 to 20 bucks, but guys, when you're on a budget, you got to do what you got to do. Alright, so I had previously cleaned the sealing surfaces on both the front of the block and the lip of the pan. Now I'm going to go ahead and install some new silicone in the corner where the pan meets the block, where the cover also meet all together, just to assure that it seals. Now I'm not going to use an alignment tool, and the reason being is because when I disassembled it to do this cam swap, I never loosened up the oil pan bolt. So the oil pan is torqued down and it's where it is and it can't be moved. So there's no sense in, trying to sit there and go purchase a lineup tool when I'll just use my balancer to do it, because once the balancer is on, the front cover can't go any lower than what it is already when it's hitting the pan. So I just basically figured, hey, we'll just put it on and roll from there. Now I'm also going to apply a small amount of sealer to the keyway on the crank to hold the key in position while we try to get the balancer started. And it's just a little bitty square stock key chuck, whatever you want to call it. And I'll get it in its position and then we'll start going to the crank. Now I do use anti-seize on the crank snout or the inside of the balancer. And I will put some lube on the surface that will touch the seal. So I'm just going to line up the key and just barely get this started, and then using a balancer installer, and this one that I have just so happens to have a bearing, and we use silicone on it and it's not as messy, it just goes everywhere on your hand. But anyway, so just screw this in until it gets real snug and bottoms out, and then we tighten it up with the ratchet, and then I'll go ahead and get a camera and you can see how easy the balancer goes on using a balancer installer. Now guys, since it does have a keyway and the clearance might be a little different, I hear people heating them and everything else, it's going on with very little strain. I don't know if it's because it's cleaned and everything or what, but I see where people have headaches doing this, and for me it was pretty much a breeze, as you can see. Once the balancer bottomed out, I removed the installer. And guys, this next step kind of threw me for a loop. For some reason, the LS World wants you to torque the balancer down to 250 foot-pounds to make sure it's seated before you put the final torque on a new bolt. Well, I'm not using a standard bolt, and the bolt that I have, we did run it up, and I used the half-inch drive torque wrench set at 250 pounds. And I ain't gonna lie, guys, with this being on an engine stand and trying to put that much torque on a bolt head, it was freaking scary. So I went on ahead and switched from my regular chrome socket to an impact socket just to be safe. And again, I mean, you can see the stand flexing and everything else, and it appears that I'm bouncing on the torque wrench at one time or another, but guys, that's actually when I relax, you can watch the stand itself flex back up. So it's not bouncing on the torque wrench, it's just the stand giving it a push back upwards after it's done. And yes, I used a half-inch impact to break that sumbitch loose. It was tight, and then I backed it off with a half-inch ratchet. Now, if you look real close here, at 3 o'clock is my regular keyway, and then there's a round hole at 12 and 6. Those are actually for the round dowels for the mandrel for my centrifugal supercharger. So I'm going to put the one in at 6, but then I'm going to put the other one at 12 in the mandrel, and then use a dead blow or a rubber mallet, whatever you would prefer to call it, to seat my mandrel. And then after that, I'm going to put a little anti-seize on my bolt and torque it to 200 foot-pounds. Now, a lot of aftermarket bolt companies say to torque it to 245, guys, but since I'm using the anti-seize, I usually go 10 to 20% less, so I just stuck to the 200. Speaking of anti-seize, I'm going to use a little bit on the bolts that go through my pan to my front cover, since the front cover is aluminum as well. So it'll be installed on both the lower bolts that go through the oil pan up to the front cover. So I went on ahead and tightened up all the front cover bolts, including the lower ones, and after they were snug, I set the torque wrench to 18 foot-pounds and torqued them. Once the sequence was complete, I went once around just to double check everything, and then I torqued the two lower bolts to 18 foot-pounds as well. Well, there y'all have it. She's all buttoned up, and again, I'd like to thank Bubba for the help with the cam, and I'm going to go ahead and wipe this down and put it back in the bag, and until next time, I'll catch you later.